Tara, the Middle East is somewhere that I'm sure a lot of people in America don't really care about, can't relate. Can we just introduce Pancetta, please?
This entire trip has been about deals.
If a deal goes through, Iran can actually start exporting more oil. How far is America willing to go?
What's the vibe in the region right now?
I think there was a sense of optimism before this trip that there might be some sort of announcement or breakthrough.
Will the American president really put pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu?
Welcome to State of the World. I'm Sally Lockwood in Dubai.
And I'm Tara Palmeri in New York and often in Washington.
I've covered stories as a journalist around the world, from Afghanistan to Ukraine, most recently as an anchor for Sky News.
I am a political journalist, and I was a White House correspondent for ABC News, covering the Trump administration. I can't believe Trump's in your hometown for once.
I know, weird, but also great and interesting. Trump is here in the United Arab Emirates right at the time of recording. I'm in Dubai and he's in Abu Dhabi, an hour down the road. Of course, he's had this big trip to the Middle East this week. His first state visit since returning to office. And it's been a really big deal in this part of the world. But what do people make of it over there, Tara? The Middle East is somewhere that I'm sure a lot of people in America don't really care about, can't relate. I'm sorry, can we just introduce Pancetta, please?
Yeah. Pancetta is our roving dog correspondent who is on high alert for any noise inside of my building. I want to yell at her right now, but I know that it is useless because she will not. Okay,
so for the purposes of sound, we're just going to let you know that is Pancetta. She has her own Instagram page. You can follow her if you like.
Pancetta Stromboli di Dupont, I believe, is her name right now.
So you may hear Pancetta now and then, but we'll just crack on. So yeah, Trump's here. It's a big deal in this region. There's been a lot of talk about Donald Trump's visit to the Middle East. But, for those who aren't politically engaged in America, the average American potentially, do people care about this trip to the Middle East, Tara? And what do they make of it? Somewhere that they can't necessarily relate to or they've maybe never been.
No, this is a huge deal. I mean, it's just telling that it's President Trump's first foreign trip. It's to the Middle East. Same during the first administration. And this entire trip has been about deals, right? He wants to be able to come back to the American people and say, I, forged all of these deals with these Arab countries and we're a richer nation because of it. And that's the story. And it feels like a lot of the figures are inflated, in fact. But I mean, the thing that's hanging over all of this is the fact that he wants to accept this $400 million jumbo jet 747 from Qatar, something that has even, his MAGA allies up in arms saying this is insane, breaks the emoluments clause.
Quick question
Yeah.
on that. So Air Grift 1 or whatever it's being called, right?
Is it being called Air Grift 1? I must have missed that one.
I have read
brilliant.
that. Yeah. So, like you say, it's provoked a lot of controversy, a lot of criticism. But even MAGA supporters, are they really critical about it as well? What are they worried about?
Absolutely. You've got Laura Loomer. As you know, we've had her featured on State of the World. Yeah, friend of the show. She said it was a bridge too far, and she was like, I would take a bullet for President Trump, but this is too slimy for her. Ben Shapiro is a huge conservative commentator in the U.S., one of the top podcasters. He said that this is not America First policy to be taking gifts from foreign countries, but he really won't give it up. And when questioned about it during this trip, he said, well, we should have the kind of planes that you see when you land at the airport in Saudi Arabia. They have beautiful planes, and ours is 40 years old, and we deserve more than that. And what's even more telling is that he wants to keep it for after his presidency.
Yeah, Trump's easily seduced by compliments, gifts, deals. Does it smack with naivety, do you think, him wanting to accept this gift from a foreign nation?
I don't think it's naivety at all. I mean, I think he knows it's crossing the line. It's optically a mess. But you're right. Trump is seduced by it all. And in fact, the Saudis and Qatar and all the countries there, they're seducing him with the things that he likes and feels comfortable with. The pageantry, the feeling of being among kings, the way he's being treated when he walks in. He was greeted at the airport by the crown prince and then brought to the palace, and he's around gold and he's around all of the opulence that he likes. He's turned the Oval Office into like a gilded palace in a lot of ways, the trappings that he's added to it. So President Trump clearly feels more comfortable in a place like the Emirates, the place like Qatar, and a place like Saudi Arabia, where it's a bit flashier. It's a bit more his style. And they know the way to his heart is through money. And attention. And attention, yeah. And I mean, just think about this, Sal. Any country, foreign country that gives a gift like this, that would have a floating situation room, if you will, in the air with all the top leaders talking at all times, about their plans. How can they accept that and not be concerned that it would be bugged? And that,
or even the quid pro quo. Can't even say
right.
It. The quid pro quo.
Quid pro quo.
If you're going to give someone a jumbo jet that's worth what, $400 million? Is that how much it costs? I can't even remember.
Yeah, $400
anyway,
million.
I guess you have to ask yourself, what do they want in return? He's not concerned
and
about
I think,
that.
I mean, Qatar got a visit from the American president, a very tiny country.
Yeah, but they have a lot of influence. They have a lot of soft power. In this region, they're hosting the peace talks between Hamas and Israel. During the evacuation of Afghanistan in 2021, they received tens of thousands, if not more, refugees from Afghanistan. They definitely have created a role and a level of influence for themselves in the world for such a small nation, like you say, but they have deep pockets. And definitely a lot of diplomatic influence these days. I've spent a fair bit of time in Doha, and it's an impressive place. And one thing we should also mention, Tara, is that Donald Trump, unlike his last visit to the Middle East in his first term, he hasn't gone to Israel on this trip. I did wonder if he was going to make a surprise visit to Israel, but it's been notable in its absence that he hasn't gone there. Has that upset people? There's a big Jewish community in America. Has that upset people? Do they feel it's a snub?
It has been pointed out. It suggests that President Trump is growing a little weary of negotiating with Netanyahu. Instead, they have this surprise possible deal with Iran. I think that's shocked the world. They offered them a deal, Steve Witkoff did, and it seems like they may actually accept it to lessen the economic sanctions that they've been suffering under. I mean, what's your take on that, Sal, when you saw that Iran might actually take a nuclear deal?
Well, it's been murky, I would say. So initially the news sounded really positive and an incredible turn of events. The Supreme Leader speaking to NBC News made it sound like they were prepared to make huge efforts and sacrifices in terms of giving up their enriched uranium and allowing inspectors in order to have economic sanctions lifted on the country. Donald Trump then said, it was quite vague language. He said something like, Iran has sort of agreed to the terms of a deal. And then less than 24 hours later, the president of Iran comes out and says, essentially rubbishes it and says, Donald Trump's being naive, that this is not the case. We aren't going to give up our dignity. And he essentially said the exact opposite. So I'm actually really interested to get the views of our guest on this. Gregg Carlstrom, who is the Middle East correspondent for the Economist.
Gregg, thanks for joining.
Great to meet you, Gregg. You're in Riyadh, is that right?
I am, yes.
And you obviously know this region extremely well. You are you live here in Dubai, as far as I understand. And you've been a Middle East expert for many, many years now. We're really interested to get your read on this Iran nuclear deal, not deal. What's going on?
That's a very good question. I think nobody is entirely sure what's going on. We've had two, I think, almost conflicting statements that have come out or reports in the past week. You had Trump earlier today in Qatar on the second leg of his trip through the Gulf, saying that America and Iran were close to a deal, that he thought it was almost done. And then you had a report this afternoon that Steve Witkoff, the president's Middle East envoy, presented a written proposal to the Iranians on Sunday. It's the first time he's given them a formal proposal for what a deal might look like. And he did that in his latest round of talks on Sunday. It's very hard to imagine that he would offer a first proposal, the Iranians would say yes, and we're close to a deal. There's going to be a lot of back and forth. It took 2 years of back and forth to get to a deal last time around when the Obama administration did it. So it's hard to square those two things. It's hard to think that we've only just started exchanging formal proposals, and yet somehow this process is close to being done.
But it does feel like it's becoming increasingly urgent. Is that fair to say? You know, just how many weeks away could Iran potentially be from making a nuclear weapon?
It's a political decision more than anything at this point. If Iran decided to do that, to enrich uranium to 90% purity, which is what you need to build a bomb, they could probably, within a matter of days, have enough enriched uranium for a bomb. They have a stockpile right now that's enough that it could be refined into about 6 bombs worth. That's not to say they would have a working nuclear weapon at that point. There's other things you have to do. You have to take that uranium, fashion it into a warhead, and then put that warhead on something that can be delivered onto a missile or some other delivery system. So it's not to say that in a matter of days they have a working bomb, but they could cross that threshold and have weapons-grade uranium quite quickly if they wanted to.
And just one last question on that. If economic sanctions were lifted on Iran, if this deal did go through, what sort of a difference would that make for people there? What impact are those sanctions having on the country, a country that's got a very young, very educated population?
So I think the most immediate impact would be around oil. Iran's oil is right now subject to American sanctions. It's still managing to export about 1 million barrels a day, but it has to do it in a very roundabout way where that oil is shipped to third countries, and then the origin is disguised, and then it's loaded onto these very dodgy old tankers that don't have proper insurance and turn their transponders off. And it's a very expensive, very cumbersome way to export your oil, and you have to sell it at a discount because anyone who's buying it is taking the risk of being sanctioned by the United States. So if a deal goes through, Iran can actually start exporting more oil at market prices, the way any other oil exporting country does. So that should unlock, billions of dollars over the course of a year or two that would be badly needed revenue for the Iranian government. Then I think beyond that, the question is, how far is America willing to go on sanctions relief? Because the sanctions aren't only about Iran's nuclear program. There are also sanctions imposed over its support of militia groups in the region, its support of terrorism. Would those things remain in place? If a lot of those do remain in place, then Iran doesn't get fully reintegrated into the global economy. It will still be somewhat isolated.
Gregg, I wanted to ask you about your latest piece about Trump trying to reboot the relationship between the U.S. And the Middle East. What did you make of his speech, his appearance? Like, what's the vibe in the region right now? And do you think that this new position is sustainable?
So if you go back to the transition to November to December, there was a lot of optimism in the region that Trump was going to do what he said on the campaign trail, that he was going to try to end wars in the Middle East and be a more pragmatic American president. And he seemed to do that during the transition. He put some pressure on the Israeli government to agree to a ceasefire in Lebanon, and then later really put pressure on them to agree to the ceasefire in Gaza, which was announced the day before his inauguration. So everybody was very happy. Everybody was looking forward to Trump taking power. Thing is, though, then March comes along and Trump allows Netanyahu to back out of the Gaza ceasefire. He doesn't really force him to negotiate the second phase of that deal, which was meant to be a permanent end to the war in Gaza. He starts this bombing campaign against the Houthis in Yemen. No one is really sure what his Iran policy is at that point. There were no negotiations between the US and Iran. He seemed to have suddenly gone in a much more hawkish direction than he promised. And of course, we were hearing about all of these fights within the administration. We were seeing some of these fights play out in leaked signal chats. And it looked like the more hawkish or neoconservative wing of Trump world was ascendant. people that I've spoken to this week, both here in Riyadh and around the region, listening to his speech on Tuesday, they thought, okay, great, we're back to that more pragmatic Trump. He explicitly said, interventionism has wrecked the Middle East. He denounced neocons and nation builders. He didn't mention Israel at all. He said Gazans deserve a better life. He sounded much more pragmatic talking about the region. So it was received very well in the Middle East. People liked what he had to say, but let's see what happens going forward. Let's see how long this new version of Trump lasts.
Do you think they get the sense that he just comes in there and says what they want to hear and then he leaves and then they get a totally different story the next day? I mean, he hasn't been a reliable partner anywhere, really.
No, he hasn't. And he's not only is he inconsistent and unreliable, but I think one thing we learned in his first term is that the last person Trump talks to is the person he listens to. So yeah, exactly. He's in the Middle East this week. He's meeting with Gulf leaders. He's not stopping in Israel, notably, excuse me, on the way back home. So he's hearing this very pragmatic, de-escalatory message from governments in this region who don't want a war with Iran, who didn't really want him to start this long bombing campaign against the Houthis, who are desperate for the Gaza war to end. That's what he's hearing this week. That's why he made that surprise announcement around sanctions relief for Syria, because the Saudi crown prince and the Turkish president asked him to do it, and they were really lobbying him to do it, and he went along with it. But will he actually deliver that sanctions relief? We haven't seen formal guidance yet from the White House or the Treasury Department on what sanctions are you lifting, how long is that going to take, what's that process going to be like? And people, I think, are starting to get a bit worried that Trump made this big announcement, but he won't follow through.
And just on Gaza, Gregg, I think there was a sense of optimism before this trip that there might be some sort of announcement or breakthrough. Certainly people in Gaza that I've spoken to felt like Trump brought a lot of hope when he came to office. There was that first ceasefire, which lasted the best part of 2 months, and it made a huge difference for them. But there's been really no breakthrough on this trip. In fact, it's almost been the elephant in the room in terms of it not being publicly talked about enough. Do you think what's been potentially said behind closed doors with these Arab nations may now have some sort of impact in terms of how Donald Trump approaches Israel and the ceasefire talks?
It was the elephant in the room, and that was partly because that's how some of the leaders in the region wanted it to be. They didn't want Trump to dwell on this too much in public unless he was going to make a big announcement around getting to a ceasefire. Otherwise, it was just going to overshadow the rest of the trip. And obviously, the Gaza war is deeply unpopular in the Arab world. So they didn't want him to spend much time on it without a big breakthrough. I think, it's the same. I feel like I'm repeating myself over and over and over when I talk about this over the past year or so. It comes down to a question of, will the American president really put pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu to end the war, to permanently end the war? When Biden was in power, every couple of weeks there were these leaks about how he was losing patience with the Israeli government and he was finally going to get tough on Bibi. And that never actually happened. Those leaks never actually translated to policy change. I think we're seeing over the past month that Trump is also losing patience with Netanyahu. There was that moment in the Oval Office in early April when he was sitting next to Netanyahu and he announced that America and Iran were going to start nuclear negotiations. Netanyahu was taken unaware by that. He obviously wasn't happy about that. You could see it on his face when he was sitting there. Then the truce in Yemen that Trump announced last week, again, not coordinated at all with the Israelis. So it seems like Trump is, on some things, willing to break with Bibi, but will he do that on Gaza? Will he come out and say the war needs to end, and if it doesn't end, we're cutting off military support, diplomatic support for Israel? If he doesn't do that, I don't think it's ending anytime soon.
Yeah, and in fact, not only did America strike that deal with the Houthis without Israel being involved, it seems it didn't even extend to Israel, Gregg, because the airport in Tel Aviv was hit after that truce was announced. But we also have to look to the Israeli ground operation that is due to start imminently in Gaza. The entire Gaza Strip will essentially be part of this ground operation, and they want to push 2 million Palestinians into 20% of the land in the south. It's unthinkable what that might look like for people in Gaza. Do you think that there's any sense Donald Trump might try and stop it? I mean, I think there was a lot of hope that he might, say something. He might have some sort of influence over Netanyahu, but it feels like things are just getting worse in Gaza.
I think the first question is, can Israel actually go ahead with this big offensive in Gaza? It's deeply unpopular in Israel. About 2/3 of Israelis in every poll that you look at in recent months, about 2/3 of Israelis say they want the war to end, they want a permanent hostage deal. The army is having a problem with morale. They're having issues where when units call up reservists for another tour of reserve duty, only about 50% of those soldiers actually show up because many of them have already been mobilized many times since October 7th, and they have lives, they have families, they have jobs. So within the army, they're struggling to mobilize the manpower they would need. They're talking about calling up something like 70,000 troops for this bigger operation in Gaza. It's not even clear if they can do that. So that's the first question, is whether Israel can overcome its own internal opposition to this offensive in Gaza. And then I think Trump, from everything that we are hearing from people around Trump, he doesn't want to see the Israelis do this. He came to the Middle East, on this trip this week, looking for some quick wins, some good headlines, looking to be the guy who's delivering deals and delivering peace. And I really don't think he wants to see the Israelis go ahead with this enormous open-ended reoccupation of Gaza. But again, just how far is he willing to go to stop it? We're not sure yet.
Yeah, that's the thing about President Trump is he wants to be the one to save the day, but he doesn't seem like he really wants to get into the nitty gritty of it. And also he wants the peace prize at the end, but he's growing weary of all of these wars that he said he could solve on day one, right? Ukraine, Russia. He's not even going to the meeting in Turkey. Vladimir Putin he made him look kind of foolish by suggesting that they have this meeting in Turkey and then saying he's not showing up for it. Now Marco Rubio will be there with Vladimir Zelensky, but there'll be no Putin, there'll be no Donald Trump. And the same thing I think with Israel right now. I think he's, from what I'm being told, he's growing weary of dealing with Netanyahu. And I think we'll see on his Truth Social if he decides to go to the next step and actually call him out on it in the same way that he did towards Vladimir Putin. You're even seeing the way that he talks about Putin now and Zelensky. He's kind of putting them on the same level in a lot of ways, whereas he was only going after Zelensky. Trump wants to be the hero, and these men are not making him look good. So that's probably why he's starting to retreat from the world stage, and he's sticking to what he knows best, which is deal making, you could say, coming back saying I've made some economic gains. But I don't know, Craig, what do you think? Did he actually come home with substantial deals, or is this just kind of fluff, or does it look like he's,
will they materialize?
Is it legitimate? Are these true deals?
Are the numbers real?
Just Boeing that wins, basically. And maybe he gets a $400 million jet as a cherry on top.
The jet is apparently real, right? The jet is apparently in Texas already. The rest of it, the numbers, I'm not sure that they are real, honestly. If you look at, take the Saudi part of his visit, there was this $600 billion announcement, supposed to be $600 billion of trade and investment. The White House fact sheet on it didn't actually add up to $600 billion. They said there were some things that weren't listed in that fact sheet. But the biggest part of it was a $142 billion arms deal. The Saudis supposedly committed to $142 billion of weapons they wanted to buy from America. Some of the stuff in that $142 billion had already been agreed to in years past, and Trump was lumping it in and making it seem like it was a new deal. And then you compare that to the entire Saudi defense budget right now is about $78 billion. So on paper, they're committing to buy weapons worth twice as much as they spend on their entire military in a single year. So it's going to take many, many years before they buy some of this stuff. Some of it they may never buy, and some of it, again, they had already committed to buy. When you think of it that way, it starts to look a lot less impressive. And you go back to 2017, when Trump first came to Riyadh, he did something similar. He signed about a $100 billion arms deal back then. only 30 billion of that has been finalized. Here we are 8 years later, only 30 billion of that has been finalized. And I think we're going to see something similar happen with many of the deals that he's announcing on this trip.
Gregg and Tara, can I ask you both this one? Something that I am slightly obsessed with is Donald Trump's way of speaking about people and his language in general and his use of adjectives and the way he loves to praise how people look. So, you know, the Emir of Qatar, the Crown Prince of Saudi were both good looking and tall. And the president of Syria, which was, you know, an extraordinary meeting. You know, I think he praised how he looked and being strong and having a strong past or whatever it was he said. What is this obsession with the way he describes how people look? I mean, is he that easily impressed by looks that he then gives people essentially more credibility because they look good? Tara,
no, come
on.
This is just the way that Trump talks to people. Okay. He's like, it's just very casual Queens style of like, you look great. And yeah, he's obsessed with how people look in terms of like cabinet and how he hires people and how he sees his challengers. Like he was intimidated by someone like Gavin Newsom because he thought he had good hair and he was presentable and he speaks about people
good hair. I mean, hilarious.
Yeah, and he speaks, I guess, yes, it's partially the way he sees the world. Like it's a TV show from the 1960s. And it's always central casting. And he does look at people and how they present themselves and he values them in that way. But I also think part of it is just like, that's how he compliments people based on their appearance.
And Gregg,
I don't know that it actually, I think money speaks more than looks for him. Yeah.
That said, Gregg, I'm sure if he met you, he would say you have great hair, it's good looking. He writes long articles, smart guy. He wrote a book.
Is that how Americans sound like to you, Sal?
But seriously, Gregg, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? The way he's been talking about these Gulf leaders and then the way his administration talks about Europe, a traditional ally of America, the whole world order is being turned on its head, would you say?
It is, and I think what Tara said about money is exactly right. I mean, I think the reason he likes Gulf leaders is because he thinks that they have bottomless amounts of money, that this region is like an ATM and you press a button and $1 trillion comes out. And that's not actually the way it works these days, particularly in Saudi, where oil prices are low and they're running a deficit and they're not in a great financial situation in Saudi right now. But Trump has this idea in his head that these people are incredibly rich and he loves that. And then I think he also has this affection for monarchies. I mean, you look at the way he talks about the British royal family, about the king and the late queen, and how meaningful that visit was during his first term and how excited he is to go back to Windsor Castle. He has this thing he admires, he almost reifies monarchy. And I think the fact that you have a lot of monarchs in this region who know how to put on a really good show for him gets through to him.
I 100% agree with you. He loves the pomp and circumstance. This is what he's here for.
Yeah, he likes the pomp and ceremony and probably does he feel like he's king of America?
I think
he would like to.
Yeah, are the Trumps the closest you can get to monarchy in America? Is that how Donald Trump views it potentially? Who knows? Gregg, it's been so great to have your expertise on, and I look forward to meeting you in person when you're back in Dubai.
That would be great.
And I just want to say you both have great hair today, and you're both beautiful.
So do you. Doing the wave. I love it now. It's a great look for you.
Strong people. Good journalist, beautiful, great hair. Thanks so much.
And this is why you should actually watch the show on YouTube at State of the World, because you can look at our hair there.
Yeah, exactly. Hit subscribe if you haven't already. Tara, do your thing.
Yeah, comment, like, share it with your friends. Make this show blow up. We're bringing you the inside scoop and all of our analysis on what's going on around the world, because let's face it, this is a globalized world and it matters. Thank you to our special guest, and we'll see if President Trump holds up to his end of the bargain next week.
Yeah. Thanks to our new friend of the show, Gregg Carlstrom. We'll see you next week. Thank you. Bye, guys.